cited a lot of elements, migration, climate, cross-border criminalism, terrorism, and so on, to increase the necessity of European common work. Thank you.
Brendan, would you like to get in?
No.
Not at this stage. Okay, we'll take the next contributor, Ms. Anna Fotyga from Poland.
Thank you very much, Chairman. The societies of two important member states in the EU rejected the constitutional treaty in referenda, which were the visions of federal Europe. The UK society, when polled, say that do not subscribe to this vision. So I believe that confronting us with this vision after the Lisbon Treaty entered into force, and doing that by President Barroso and Viviane Reding, and pointing to alternatives of Europe of double speed or many speeds, is a devilish vision to me. If we look for democratic legitimacy, we should come back to the vision of founding fathers of Europe, to the solidarity, to Europe of solidarity, inclusive, not exclusive Europe. Madam Reding's absence today, where we have so many questions to ask her, is the best proof that there's still a long way to go as regards democratic legitimacy in the European Union. Thank you.
Very much. Mr. Stefan Schenak from Austria.
Danke, Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you, Chairman. I can like to say that more Europe, a deeper Europe, is the order of the day for us. So I would disagree with Mr. Cash. We have the European and Monetary Union, the European Banking Union. I think over the next decade, we will see Europe change a lot, and I think it's right that it deepens. But I think there will be other things that will be required as well. A social union, introduction of an FTT, an end to differentiated tax and tax dumping. There needs to be harmonization there. And there's also austerity policies which are to some extent counterproductive. Youth policy also, we need a couple of things. Firstly, labour market services coordinated across Europe and a dual education system for both apprentices and lots of other areas. We have cooperation between Austria, Belgium, Germany, etc., so we need to do work there. And that will help to reduce unemployment, youth unemployment levels to what we see in Austria, for example, 4 to 5%. So I think we need to tackle that unemployment, particularly youth unemployment.
Mr. Panimandos Marias from Greece.
The EU is plagued by unemployment, poverty and social exclusion because for a number of years now we are following economic policies based on neoliberalism. The financial crisis, and in particular the public debt, the sovereign debt crisis that is affecting countries in the European periphery, has turned the EU from a union of member states and peoples to a union of debtors, given that EU member states are divided in debtors and creditors. Greece, Ireland, Portugal and Cyprus are now under very close monitoring by the Troika that imposes memoranda on them. That is programs of abrupt adjustment, financial adjustment, that lead to austerity, poverty and unemployment. In the case of Greece in particular, the IMF itself has admitted that the memorandum has failed, and it has led 1.5 million of our citizens to unemployment. Through the policy of memoranda, Troika has in fact taken the place of governments, national parliaments, thus undermining democracy, the democratic regime and sovereignty. The EU can really exist only if they choose to change this austerity policy by implementing a new Marshall Plan that will create jobs, turn the European Central Bank as a lender of last resort, by deleting the debt of southern member states, by creating a new balance between the European North and the European South based on solidarity.
The next speaker is Mr. Petras Austrevicius from Lithuania.
Correctly, Chairman. Colleagues, indeed, I greatly appreciate the panelists' interventions, and I do support the view that we pretend somehow to forget the achievements of the European Union. And indeed, if we look at the achievements of the European Union, mainly peace, stability and development, the overwhelming part of our population appreciates all this. Indeed, the enlargement policy is a success story of the European Union very, very much. But, colleagues, let's not be afraid to dream about Europe. I think we need new ideas, new projects and new visions, what comes for future. Again, we need acting Europe, meaning once we agree, the action plan should be in place and monitoring performed very well. And we have to reflect Europe. I mean, we have to stay in touch with our population, and down-top approach should prevail. But I wish to approach panelists asking their points of view on the need for new security strategy for the European Union, more comprehensive, better reflecting the global position of the European Union as the player it's now, and indeed probably better interaction between EU and NATO. My view is on the December summit 2013, once the European Council should approach this issue, and I would appreciate your comments, gentlemen, on this particular issue, since I believe EU should take more responsibility, but it should be better equipped and better managed.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Slaven Radinovic from Montenegro.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues, first of all, on behalf of the delegation of the Montenegrin Parliament, I would like to greet you all. Croatia is the next ex-Yugoslav country after Slovenia, which will officially obtain the status of a member state of the European Union on July 1st. It represents a positive step not only for the country, but also for its neighbors, which are already involved in the integration process. European integration remains a priority objective of the Montenegrin foreign policy. It is known that Montenegro has almost completed screening as the first phase in the negotiation process. In addition, chapters 25 and 26 were opened and provisionally closed. According to the resolution of the European Parliament, adopted in April this year, progress of Montenegro was recognized, as well as its leading role in the region. Towards EU membership, Montenegro was seeking to improve and develop regional cooperation, not only because it represents an essential element of the stabilization and association process, but also because of its economic, political and social interests. On this occasion, we can mention few regional initiatives like Southeast Europe, Central European Initiative or Adriatic Union Initiative, in which Montenegro and Croatia cooperated too. The availability of the entire translation of European legislation was certainly of particular importance for Montenegro, as well as studying the experiences of the Croatian path to full membership in the European Union. In that sense, relations between Montenegro and Croatia represent a good example of regional cooperation on the path of European integration. Montenegro will have added...
Thank you very much for your contribution. Now, the response first. Brendan, would you like to get in? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we're dividing up our responses in order to save time so that the members of the Parliament can have even more interventions than would otherwise be possible. So let me be very brief in reacting. I'm not going to repeat what my colleague had said, other than in particular to welcome the news from Lord Boswell that this work has been done with regards to a study on the role of national parliaments. And I think that all delegations, I'm sure, would want to take up this invitation to participate. And I think that we will look forward with keen anticipation to the findings. He makes the point of the necessity for real dialogue between Commission, the Parliament, the Council and the European Council, and in there he also sticks national parliaments. I think that when the analysis is carried out, I think it will be seen that the real missing piece in the current architecture is that of national parliaments. And I repeat the point that they've got to be brought, I think, institutionally into the system, rather than being outside, as it were, just simply being consultant. With regards to the democratic legitimacy and the absence of a European demos, this is a problem that's very often discussed. It's not one that I find sympathy with. I regard the European Union as an alliance of independent states who voluntarily come together to share their sovereignty. I think that ultimately the responsibility for managing the European Union rests with member states, with their governments and with their national parliaments. I have a great deal of sympathy with the point made by our friend from Austria who called for a social union and for a coordinated labour market policies. I think that the social agenda has very much fallen off in terms of its importance since the departure of Jacques Delors as the Commission President. And I think it is wise to remind parliamentarians in particular of the necessity to put it back up centre stage, particularly as a means of dealing with real life issues. I thought the comment about the necessity for a European Marshall Plan is extraordinarily interesting. It probably is the next great project that we're going to have to embark upon together. We cannot allow the European economies individually and separately to languish as they are, and we've got to coordinate, I think, macroeconomic policy together. We can only do it by working together and using the Marshall Plan as a template, and I would think that is a very helpful proposal. With regards to a new security strategy, EU and NATO, I think that may very well be likely, but I think it should also be seen in the context of Europe's relationships with China. And I was conscious in the fact that over the last month, Chinese colleagues have been making the point that they want a strategic relationship, a strategic partnership with Europe. I think this is one way in which we could respond, because they have a particular interest in saying that the world that they are going to develop over the next 4 decades in particular is a peaceful one. So thank you very much for those comments.
Thank you. Herman, would you like to get in?
No, thank you.
Not yet. Next speaker is Anna Purcell from Romania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ne bucurăm confirmarea necesității absolute.
We welcome and we confirm the need to associate non-Euro member states in the integration process within the European Union. We believe that a real and effective monetary union should ensure a balance between state responsibility and European solidarity. An increased responsibility of member states should not be seen as a substitute for solidarity. And since this year is the European Year of Citizens, I think it is necessary to have more focused initiatives to fight against the Euroscepticism that is becoming well spread in several member states. We don't support the concept of asymmetrical adjustment, which is taking place in the EU, with an undervalue in Southern and Eastern Europe, because the cost of this phenomenon is unacceptable and will lead to conflict. We believe that the way to deep and comprehensive monetary union should start with the correct diagnostic of the correct causes of the crisis and the structural vulnerabilities of the monetary and economic union that led to the crisis. We believe that the real causes of the crisis have not been clearly identified, and the states are considered to be not resilient enough, and the markets are not taken into account.
Luboš Blaha from Slovakia.
Ďakujem. Súhlasím s predrečníkmi, že potrebujeme viac Európy.
Thank you. I agree that we do need more Europe, but we also need a different Europe, more social Europe, Europe that is closer to the citizens, that it can provide social guarantees. For example, basic living income. I'm convinced that we need a new economic model. Slovakia has some experience with a centralized economy, a planned economy. That was very extreme. It didn't work. People didn't like it. And then after 1989, we have experience now with free market. But again, the crisis has shown that that went to an extreme and it didn't function properly. So people are against it now. So I think if you use the market as a religion, if you go too far, it doesn't work. We need a mixed economy that has a social component. We need a social market economy that can take different forms, social businesses, etc. This kind of thing works in Spain, in Italy, and elsewhere. You have cooperative company structures, for example. I think that this would bring greater equality of distribution and greater growth across Europe, and also increased co-decision making. I think Europe must not go down the liberal path that it is taking at the moment. It has to be more democratic. And thank you.
Here is Mr. Francesco Speroni from the European Parliament.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Chairman. Talking about the future of European integration, well, we also need to look at those people who do not want further European integration, the Eurosceptics. And they also represent a legitimate democratic position. And the politicians who, well, they call for a vote for citizens rather than for the institutions. We hear about this model of the United States of America being the model. I think the Swiss model would be better. There you have several communities, several languages, unlike in the United States. The best thing, I think, however, would be to get over the idea of the national state and work towards a union of peoples and regions. And doing this through macro regions, European regions, which are essentially homogeneous. National parliaments need to be stricter when it comes to subsidiarity and also when it comes to their control over the European budget, because at the end of the day you're talking about citizens' money here. And citizens now feel estranged from the whole process because the European Union does not have referenda. Sometimes there are referenda in various member states on a given treaty or issue. However, at a union level, there's no such thing as a referendum at a union level. And this really creates a gap. And this is why I refer back again to the Swiss model.
The next speaker is Mr. Ruben Moreno from Spain.
Thank you very much, Chairman. If we're going to be talking about the future of European integration, I think we need to expect a greater effort to implement decisions that have been taken. We need to complete the agreements achieved at the highest level. I think that's fundamental if we want a credible process. Now, we've been talking about the fact that the fate of Europe is perhaps moving towards a federal, united states of Europe. And I think that's logical in terms of integration. We want integration, but in terms of historical differences. And we also have to be realistic about where we stand. If we want more legitimacy, that is crucial. And you can only achieve that by integration, which integration is the only response to globalism. And now is the time for progress. Growth and employment would be the best gift we can give to our citizens in this year, which is the European Year of Citizens. The best way to reconcile Europe with its citizens is to do things well, tackle unemployment, work towards growth, and complete everything we've set ourselves.
Edgar Mayer from Austria.
Thank you, Vorsitzender.
Thank you, Chairman. The European Union has, over the past few years, been dealing primarily with the crisis, and certainly the first thing to do was to take measures, and that have had a certain degree of success, but I think it has led to a decline in trust and confidence among the citizens. So I think that's not enough. I think we need to make visible progress on unemployment. We need to tackle the economy in a broader context. And I think today's economy, it cannot be compared to the economy of 60 years ago. Increasingly, the euro is seen as the cause of the problems rather than a possible solution, and this could lead to a disintegration of union and renationalization if measures against that movement are not taken. I think we need to clearly define the path that we're going down now, between now and 2015. I think we're all in Europe, and I don't think we should always be talking down Europe. We need to talk up Europe. We need to take measures to tackle the economic and financial crisis, but there has to be a constant review on feasibility and success of those measures. For example, longer deadlines for repayments. It's something which needs to be checked regularly. And if we want effective results, and if there are effective results, they need to be profiled that there are successful results. And also work needs to be done on speculation. If you speculate, you need to pay. Money that doesn't grow on trees. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those very interesting questions. I was just counting on many kinds of Europe we have. There is a Europe divided on Schengen. There is one on Euro. There is one which have opt-out countries. There are countries with a transition period. There are NATO countries, non-NATO countries. There are creditors and debtors. Europe have yet 8 different kinds of Europe. So we have to, in our mentality, to understand that we are not for a unified, monolithic Europe. We have to do it with a lot of nuances. So I'm very glad for the observation from Roman colleagues. But don't forget that to enlarge Europe, you need the national parliament. The last one, because there's a right of veto in that element. Of course, as a liberal, I have to say that I believe liberalism is not contradictory with democracy, but it is a political statement of my part. But I understand very well that market may not be a religion. There are a lot of people who are religious and don't be religious in the market either. But it has to be a social corrected market. But that is the question, how do you manage that? Thank you for this observation from a colleague from Slovakia. Mr. Speroni was saying democracy needs a legitimacy, and he was saying that we could be better to not to take the United States as a model. Perhaps we have to be careful for that. The dollar was created on 50 years of duration before the dollar was there. It was created because the paper of the other monies of the independent states was too weak for forgery. So you see what difference can have. And the big issue between the federal perception to abolish slavery and the southern states who are asking on the basis of their sovereignty, we need and we lack slavery, was the great civil war in the American continent. Regarding the language, I'm not sure that the United States will not be a quadri language country, and they say that Spanish language will be predominant in a few decades from now. So we can deal with all those models. Mr. Moreno from Spain, yes, it's right. If decisions are taken and they are not realized on a fast speed, you lose the tempo and you lose a lot of elements of confidence. And finally, Mr. Meyer, I can agree with you. Confidence is once again the key word. If we had the solution, if somebody had a solution to create employment and to get out of the crisis, it would be a new Nobel Prize winner. Thank you.
The next speaker is Mr. Tonino Picula from Croatia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Debates about the future of European integration are getting more intense as the advocates of more Europe or less Europe defend their arguments with more passion. I'm expecting even sharper discussion because it's still not decided what the basic goal is, the union of the states or federal state. For example, the EU has introduced common currency, euro, but it failed a couple of times to adopt constitution. The crisis, which is no longer acute but already chronic, imposes a serious question. What will be the position of Europe in the setup of the world politics of the 21st century? Will it survive 21st century? The EU actually lives between the deepening of its cohesion and the development of internal contradictions. It goes without saying that the EU, as a so-called soft power, is facing very hard challenges. Much remains unsolved in the European story, from the final external borders to the internal organizations. The EU has the most important and the most successful project in the entire European history, continues to seek an identity which outgrows statistic values and economic figures. Questions arise on the Europe of citizens, Europe of regions, Europe of nations, but all dilemmas basically incorporate the fear of bureaucratization of the Union or turning the EU into the Europe of elites. I would like to see the European Union continue to serve both hopes and grant better life for the European citizens in the future. My country, Croatia, on the 1st of July joins the EU, which in many aspects did not exist when we opened our negotiations accessions. But Croatia, regard to its unique transition and negotiations experience, will for sure bring value added to the Union and gives its fair share in the shaping future of the EU. For the EU, having Croatia as the member state means, first of all, extending the area of political stability and cooperation in the strategic European region.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Danielle Oroy from the French Assembly.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. I too would like to say, I don't know whether there's going to be a future for the European Union if we remain within the current institutional framework, because currently the future of the Union is threatened because more and more citizens, unfortunately, no longer believe in the European Union. Many people have already said this in different ways in this room. And what are we going to do if all people hear about is austerity as the only hope for their lives? How can they continue to believe in the European Union? It's hard for them to believe in a great market serving the interests of financiers with no social and environmental dimension. So we should urgently turn the page. And the only way to do that is to have a more social Europe, in particular, with common rules to tackle unemployment. We need common rules to make sure that all workers have the same rights in all countries. We need a Europe of health. And we also need a Europe that looks at energy and climate. That's going to be the third step of the economic Europe. We had coal and steel, we've had the CAP. Now it's crucial that we look at energy and climate. Otherwise, there's not going to be the political will. Once we've done that, we can move on to looking at the institutions.
The speaker is Mr. Phidias Sarikas from Cyprus.
Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, for us to achieve profound integration of the EU, we need to make sure that citizens are at the center of the whole procedure. The economic crisis in Europe, however, leads millions of our citizens to poverty and misery and results in further alienation from the EU. The European Year of the Citizen and the dialogue between the European Commission and European citizens is an opportunity to correct mistakes of the past and make a new start in rebuilding the EU with European citizens at the heart of this effort. National parliaments and the European Parliament that represent citizens par excellence have an important role to play through their upgraded role arising from the Lisbon Treaty. National parliaments can contribute to this process through exchanging views in the context of interparliamentary cooperation so that ways can be found to bridge the gap between the EU and EU citizens and for the building of a European Union of citizens. The action of national parliaments in ensuring legitimacy could focus on issues to do with information and participation of citizens in EU policies, and we should place particular emphasis on the participation of citizens in EU elections, given that their participation in European Parliament elections is closely linked to decision-making at the EU level, and this will affect their everyday life.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Diego Lopez from Spain.
Gracias. Quisiera hacer una pregunta al...
Thank you. I'd like to put a question to Mr. Brendan Halligan on the future integration of the European Union. When talking about the future, I think we need to talk about the past as well, because in the European Union there is a problem when it comes to making agreements and taking decisions. It's a very long process. So that's the first problem. And the next problem is that there's problems, the EU has problems implementing its own agreements. For example, the Stability and Growth Pact, a huge investment, crucial at this present time, although it wasn't all new money, but nevertheless, that still hasn't been implemented. Then banking union, again, nothing very specific on it. So there is a problem with the European Commission. They should carry out the executive function. They could be a driving force so that agreements are adopted, and then once they're adopted, they're put into place, they're executed, they're implemented. So how do we solve this, Mr. Halligan? And this is something that's causing a huge credibility gap and confidence gap in the European Union. Not just the difficulty in reaching agreements, but then once agreements are in place, that we don't seem able to put them into effect. Thank you.
Go back to Brendan. We'll have one more intervention from Mr. Lajos Mile of Hungary.
Thank you, Chairman. Colleagues, a couple of elements from what has been so far. The issue of trust has been mentioned, the need for institutional reforms, the Copenhagen Initiative, economic governance, and the related decisions have been mentioned. Also, it was mentioned how the community and the national levels could be coordinated. Administration is very clumsy. It cannot respond very rapidly. And we also talked about the need for institutional reforms, and we got to the preparation of a new model. If we look at the weight of these proposals, we cannot help but face the need that the treaty needs to be modified and amended. The mode for that is the European Convention. And this is in harmony with what Andrew Duff and the Chancellor Merkel have raised, because these issues can only be addressed in the framework of a new, renewed, amended basic treaty. These are problems of a weight and proposals of a weight that do require a rethinking of the treaty. And now that we talked about trust, may I conclude by saying that it would be really welcome that on the occasion of next year's parliamentary elections, ideas about the amendment of the treaty would appear in the campaign so that people know what to decide about.
Chairman, there were a lot of very important issues raised during the course of the last 5 contributions. In particular, the colleague from Croatia, and we must welcome Croatia into the membership of the European Union with great enthusiasm. The solution to the Balkans is a historic achievement by the European Union, who shortly be celebrating the, I think, final solutions that are necessary in that region, and Croatia is very welcome. But he asked the question about defining Europe, and I often think that a very good definition came from a senior colleague in the European Commission that said, Europe is what we do. You don't go to political science looking for predetermined or pre-cooked definitions distinguishing between a federation, a confederation, a unitary state, or whatever. That it's completely unique, and we don't have the vocabulary to describe what it is we're doing, or indeed where it is we're going. I'm very taken by the series of lectures given by Andrew Schoenfield, which I would strongly recommend to members of the House of Commons, given in 1972, just prior to the entry of Britain into the EEC, in which he described the whole European project as a journey to an unknown destination. He also made the point that if you didn't want to get on the train, you didn't have to. But if you did, you accepted the fact that it was going somewhere, but you were in a position to help define it. So I'm not quite sure that we actually do know where it is we're going, and I think that Jean Monnet, in the closing paragraph of his memoirs, the very final paragraph says, please note, I have never defined what the European Economic Community is to be. I will let that emerge through what it is we Europeans do together. And I think that's a very important philosophical insight. Of course, we would agree with the point about the need for more social Europe, which has come up a number of times in the contributions now, and they can only be supported and underscored. I liked the fact that our French colleague puts energy and climate change strongly on the agenda. I think that energy is one of the great next projects that will bind us Europeans together and also help us simultaneously to fight the scourge of climate change. It will also, of course, give us energy security and will enhance our economic competitiveness. With regards to the contribution from our friend in Cyprus, I can understand the pain, and he's talking about solving the problems of the past, and why not? But he makes, I think, a very important point in which he stresses the need for national parliaments to cooperate much more with each other. But I have a slight hesitation about this, because the reason why I put up the concept of the Senate is that it institutionalizes the cooperation between national parliaments rather than leaving it to an analogous intergovernmental procedure. I mean, the genius of Jean Monnet was to insist that there was no future for us Europeans in intergovernmentalism, particularly based on his experience of the First and Second World War and the disaster of the League of Nations, in which he was the Assistant General Secretary, never forget. And his concept is what we have done now, is shared sovereignty on the basis of common institutions, and in particular the European Commission. So I would say institutionalise the relationship between the parliaments rather than leaving it to the formulas that we have at the moment. A friend from Spain asked a most important question, and he asked me to give some answers. Why is it, basically, I suppose, it boiled down to this: why is it that we make decisions on the basis of treaties and then don't enforce them? And he was right to refer to the Stability and Growth Pact. We didn't enforce them because there were no rules inside the treaties as to how they were to be enforced. But the Fiscal Compact now deals with that effect in relation to the Stability and Growth Pact, because we've learned on the basis of experience that we cannot leave it voluntarily to the member state governments to actually comply with the law, with the rules that they've laid down themselves, for themselves. That includes my government over the past 20 years. We've all got to look at ourselves and say, where did the problem originate? It originated with us individually not abiding by the rules. The French need to say that, the Germans need to say that. So we have to put down rules that you cannot get out of. And I think that the Fiscal Compact is pretty close to that in terms of economic governance. The use of the European Convention, I think, is a very splendid idea. It was used before, it was successful. In terms of the next evolution of the treaties, I think it should be the case. And I would like to see the national parliaments have an even bigger role than they had in the past, because that will then ensure some stronger element in terms of acceptability and legitimacy for whatever is ultimately negotiated. Remember, by governments. It is governments who conclude treaties, and it is parliaments who ratify them. Ultimately, then, it's this relationship between national and parliaments and governments that is crucial and essential to the future of the Union. So I appeal to you on the basis of spending such wonderful time here in Dublin with us, that this is the one conclusion you will bring home. That is the utter centrality of the National Parliament and the great role that there is still there for you to play. Thank you.
Thank you, Brendan. Time is our enemy, I'm afraid. We do have to break for lunch at 1:15, which is very shortly. So I'm going to try to get 5 more speakers in, but that's it, I'm afraid. And I'm going to ask them to limit their contributions to just 1 minute to enable all 5 to get in. The first of those is Catherine Maureen Desailly from France. Okay, we'll move on to Elena Fattori from Italy.
The major crisis of the real economy, especially in the weakest countries, we feel is due to the rigid rules of the monetary union and also the lack of a genuine political union. When we talk about integration, we have to think about a Europe that's very different from the current one, based on putting the citizen at the centre and much more looking at direct democracy. We have the fiscal compact, but families, especially in the weakest countries, are really feeling the strain. And particular problems for countries such as Italy, very much based on SMEs. And speculation, which was helped by private and public banks, and it's important that the central bank becomes at the center of real funding for SMEs, for growth and employment.
Tra tutti, secondo noi l'introduzione
Thank you very
del
much.
reddito di cittadinanza.
Thank you. The next speaker is Gunter Kirschbaum from Germany.
Vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you, Chairman. To pick up on what a few colleagues have already mentioned, I think that the need, we need to communicate more strongly why we need the European Union. What I'm amazed at this year is that only 4% of the global population live in Europe. 96% of the global population live outside of the EU. So we have no other option, really, to work closely together on economic policy, on climate policy, on foreign policy, because otherwise we won't be taken seriously by the rest of the world. And I'd like to speak to Bill Cash directly in English.
Please do your referendum in Great Britain, but please do it now, right now. The time is over. The arguments are well known, and it is not necessary to create a Europe as a lame duck. Thank you very much.
The next speaker is Mr. Miguel Martinez from the European Parliament.
Gracias, Presidente. Well, thank you, Chairman. I think the future of European integration has to be based on understanding the past and the present. Successes which the Taoiseach talked about, and also shortcomings and mistakes, often rightly criticized, some of them criticized from positions of self-interest. Friends, I think the challenge is to consolidate our successes with mechanisms and instruments and correct the shortcomings and clearly look at what the alternative is, because often the alternative, we're told, is to return to national sovereignty. Now, I think that in a globalized society, to return to national sovereignty is basically to return to total irrelevance, even for the most powerful countries. And so I think that what we have to do is to return to the basic values of our successes, build on our successes, and make clear that the alternative is just to disappear. And finally, a question to Mr. Halligan. The idea of the Senate, you talked about that. I mean, it's an old idea. Would you agree in a more original idea? In other words, this would replace the European Council. So national parliaments would replace the European Council. Would you support that idea?
Georgios Varamonos from Greece.
Dear colleagues, if we want to look ahead to the future, we have to find answers to the question of whether there's a future for everyone. In my country, we have 30% of our citizens unemployed and 63% of young unemployed. They see no future at all. More and more of them believe that whatever politicians say is of no concern to us. What kind of democracy are we talking about? It's a European problem. It's not a Greek, Spanish, or Portuguese crisis. It's a European crisis we're going through. Unless we find a common answer, there will be no common future. We need to do something now for growth. Otherwise, both Germany and France should expect to see bad news in the future. The crisis will knock on everyone's door. The next European elections will be a very bad surprise for quite a few. And some of us should not claim that they don't know what it is that strengthens Nazism and fascism in 2013, because the links that bring European peoples together are being undermined. We need to reverse this situation, because the great contradiction is the following. We talk about integration, but what we're experiencing is division. It's an economic apartheid of sorts. What kind of Europe are we aiming for, colleagues?
Mr. Andrzej Galezuski from Poland.
Thank you. The integrational projects are being developed in the Eurozone. It's understandable, but there should be a spillover for the rest of the EU. And it should also be acceptable for non-Eurozone members. It is not acceptable for us to have political integration only within the Eurozone, to have a union within a union. And this can be fatal for the European Union. I can see two scenarios. The pessimistic scenario is that non-Eurozones will become passive. The optimistic version is that they will start cooperating between themselves and establish a second group, an alternative one to the Eurozone. Both scenarios are quite dangerous for the European Union, and I'd like to warn you against it.
Thank you very much. And finally, we have Catherine Maureen Desailly from France. Okay, we'll take the response from Herman. Are you ready? Thanks.
Oui, merci beaucoup.
Yes, thank you very much. I think this has been a very passionate debate. It's very interesting. And I can tell our colleague from Greece, I understand this really calls from the heart, saying that, look, if at some stage solve this problem, whatever the causes, wherever the solidarity comes from, at the end of the day, instead of democracy, you might have to live under the shadow of fascism again. I'm very much aware of that. It is of great concern. And we need to think about to Mr. Martinez. Well, without knowing your past, there's no future. And we're going to need a series of basic values. We need categorically to condemn any return to sub-nationalism in countries such as Spain. Is something I've fully understood. To Kirschbaum, I'm not sure that's only 4%. There's more. We represent more than 4% of the global population. However, the vast majority of global citizens do not live in Europe. And from time to time, we tend to engage in a bit of navel-gazing. We imagine ourselves to be the center of the universe because we exported our religions, we exported our culture, we exported our languages, and now we see that this somewhat artificial grafting that was a result of this, sometimes it doesn't take root, and we're seeing a reverse crusade, as the Lebanese writer Malouf said. He's a friend of mine. Madame Frattori, I'm always surprised by what we mean by citizen. I'd like to have a referendum amongst ourselves, amongst all politicians. What is a citizen? 45, 50, I was elected by citizens up to 50 years ago, and I can tell you I still don't know what a citizen is. It's a complex concept. It changes, it's temporary, it can be influenced. The citizen is somewhat difficult to understand and goes with political flow, and we're putting the concept citizen in the place now of the ancient deities, but be careful here, be somewhat objective. Let's look in an adult fashion at the diversity of public opinion. Let's try to convince them. Let's try and form public opinion rather than being led by it. And I think using the word citizen like that without thinking what we mean is a bit simplistic, and we might use it sometimes to hide our own weaknesses, really blame the citizens for all our concerns and all our worries. And for a politician, I think we politicians should sometimes be humble enough to ask ourselves what we think a citizen is.
Herman, thank you very much, and to Herman, to Brendan, Bill, and all of the delegates who contributed this morning. I think thank you very much for your questions this time. That was a very useful debate, and apologies to the 5 delegates who didn't get a chance to ask a question because of the shortage of time. Now I'm going to adjourn the meeting and move to lunch. The venue is Castle Hall, which is just across the courtyard, and our staff will show you the way there. But I would like to remind delegates that during lunch, starting at 2 o'clock, we've facilitated a request by the Dutch Parliament for an informal session on EU scrutiny. So if anybody wants to attend that, that will take place in George's Hall, and our staff will show you the directions to that. We're going to resume in this room this afternoon at 2:45. So thank you very much, and the meeting is now adjourned.